Hey, I'm back with part 2 in this YouTube series documenting some leaked geopolitical analysis, connecting UBM, Common Core, Bill Gates, the depopulation agenda, so on and so forth. If you haven't checked out part 1, I suggest you do it now. And if you have, get ready for part 6 in this reading. Part 6. Background. Preparing the narrative.
During the preparation for strikes in Syria, the U.S. government repealed a long-held law to avoid local propaganda. It is important to note that the law is only for propaganda directed at Americans rather than propaganda for foreigners. While this law was only for state-funded media, the evidence of top-down control by the White House and Attorney Governor, at the very least, is out in the open. But despite this, the government knew the majority of people distrust mass media. The internet posed a difficult problem. Should an extremely unpopular action be used to catalyze civil strife? Both the Arab Spring and the coup in Ukraine utilize a powerful weapon, social media. When one creates a weapon, they usually are also working on its counter. A year after the attempted coup in Iran, an attempt was made by Joe Lieberman and other senators to introduce an internet kill switch. Various excuses were made for the proposal, but the only reasonable one is a fear of nationwide revolt. But the plan was flawed, as seen in the Arab Spring. The Tunisian government enacted a crude form of internet kill switch, and the government fell. Egypt's government enacted a more robust kill switch, and also fell. The only state that avoided using an internet kill switch was Syria, and the government is still in power. It was clear that simply jamming a signal would not calm people down and bring them back home, certainly not in the U.S., where people are largely sedated through internet home entertainment. Needless to say, an internet kill switch plan was shelved. Something more subtle was required. Part 7. Censorship Mechanism. Months before the fake chemical weapons attack in Syria, an important event occurred that most geopolitical analysts misinterpreted: the Snowden surveillance leaks. Those concerned with foreign policy said that Snowden, being originally a CIA agent, was still working for them and was attempting to brew bad relations with either Russia or China, where he had originally escaped to. This theory is patently false. The leaks were far heavier and had a far larger shift in public perception than the relatively simple and lower classification embassy cable leak. The Snowden leaks were all top secret and hugely damaging to the NSA and SIGINT organizations around the world. As an important aside, it had no effect on HUMINT organizations such as the CIA that have a different, more traditional, and arguably more reliable means of collecting information and ensuring OPSEC. Those concerned with domestic policy were too busy reacting to the leaks with disdain to really understand the purpose behind them. The information that was leaked detailed the general idea behind decrypting secure communication, splicing undersea cables, and mass surveillance, but it did not go into the specifics, something that foreign governments and terrorists would definitely benefit from. Whether Snowden deliberately leaked only these details as a ruse, or only had access to these details that he siphoned off of the NSA, is unknown. What matters, though, is how the leaks affected the population's behavior. To be specific, the chilling effect it caused. Knowing you are constantly monitored changes the way you behave. It forces you to restrict the topics you are willing to discuss. You should know this well, as a social justice warrior's weapon of choice is doxing. Exposing people's true identity brings all the consequences of their institutional and employment mechanisms from online discourse into the real world. As the ongoing disclosures by the corrupt Guardian newspaper star Glenn Greenwald revealed more and more about mass surveillance, there is one certain outcome: normalization. People have now largely accepted the surveillance, and a few more intelligent people have moved on to encrypted communication. But conversing with each other is useless when we want to get the word out. What's really required is anonymity in social media. This is the element that allows a revolt to take place, whether it's against games journalism or suddenly an unpopular ruling regime. Anonymity is currently required to go against the narrative when your very livelihood is threatened by the easily offended. Facebook took things one step further with an added algorithm where stories that are marked as faked are suppressed in the feed, not completely censored. This avoids bringing attention to the act of censorship and sidesteps the Streisand effect. As far as mechanizations go, the UK is in the lead, with the Prime Minister labeling what he calls conspiracy theorists as non-violent extremists. Cameron is about to propose a new law to effectively ban online anonymity and privacy by banning point-to-point encryption. This won't fly in the US, so Obama is proposing the same thing in a different way, encouraging businesses to essentially hand over private encryption keys, allowing the US government to execute targeted man-in-the-middle attacks and effectively decrypt all traffic. But why are the leading figures in the US establishment fearing some sort of revolt? Things aren't great at the moment, but there's nothing really pushing people to move against the ruling oligarchy. This is where things get dark and the background to all this begins to make sense. Part 8. Background. Missiles of the Patriots. If you've noticed a reoccurring pattern so far, every plan that has been put forward has actually failed to achieve its objective, but there has always been a contingency plan running in parallel that catches up and continues. This is a normal way a learned strategist works, and though it's a slow and delicate process, no state can afford to work in a straight line. The U.S. is in total diplomatic and economic war with Russia, and Russia is losing military and diplomatic clout daily, its latest loss in Cuba. Cuba and other traditional allies of Russia, such as Belarus, are not satisfied with its performance in the Middle East and are judging Russia by its ability to protect its own interests there. After all, if it fails to do so, what's the chance of it protecting them should the U.S. turn its attention on them and utilize fourth-generational warfare against them, as in the Arab Spring? This is true for BRICS as well. Their plan to effectively bankrupt the U.S. is ongoing and involves hoarding precious metals by closing energy trade using them. Russia and China have accumulated huge amounts of precious metals in the last few months, and the rate is accelerating after deals between Russia and Turkey to trade in gold, bypassing U.S. sanctions. Russia is busy trying, and largely failing, to woo South Americans into allowing it to open a permanent naval base there. China may just succeed with that proposition. On the military side of things, both Putin and Obama are increasingly bellicose with their statements. Obama has issued thinly veiled threats towards Russia regarding its actions in Ukraine. Surely a hot war between these powers could never break out. No one could survive a nuclear war after all, or so people claim. That is essentially what has been thankfully popularized by movies, but in reality has largely moved on. Despite their differences, all states share a primary goal: survival of the state. Survival of the majority of people, i.e. workers, is a secondary goal. What makes up a state? The elite, i.e. very wealthy people of a nation that act as the brains alongside the security apparatus which acts as the nervous system. A nuclear war threatens the existence of both the state and the majority. However, anyone who has seen the devastation left behind from a civil war such as Syria can attest to the fact that it is as bad, if not sometimes even worse than a nuclear war. Rather than face an externally fourth-generational war, the nuclear option increasingly becomes attractive for any of the three states should they near economic collapse. Furthermore, a much weaker state such as Russia has no other alternatives when faced with conventional warfare than to immediately escalate to a nuclear war, as it had threatened a few months ago after intercepting the missiles launched at Syria. But launching a nuclear war to avoid a civil one currently has non-negotiable and devastating consequences. Let me make one thing clear. I don't think nuclear war is likely in the short term, at least. Neither does any of the states involved. But even a small and growing likelihood must be accounted for in game theory that, quote, in-game conditions will affect the decisions made right now, and to be completely informed about the real reasons for moves. You must be aware of the win condition of a state and the different threats that it faces. This is where the state of missile defense enters the equation. Without much fanfare, the U.S. restarted its ABM, that's short for Anti-Ballistic Missile Program, at the end of 2001. What most aren't aware, however, is that Russia already has a proven ABM system that already utilizes nuclear war-tipped missiles such as the SH-08 that can shoot down most weapons around a certain perimeter. Russia has also developed a new system, potentially a satellite killer, with an EKV, but with no one paying attention to collective security agreements any longer, it has not made it public. China made its EKV public in 2007 through a missile test. Russia is currently aiming to complete its S-500 program that is to have the ability to shoot down, quote, any space object, including hypersonic missiles by 2017. In most likelihood, as it has already been delayed several times, and due to the economic warfare faced by Russia, it won't be completed until 2019. Similarly, the final stage of the U.S. ABM system will be completed around 2019 or 2020, going by the program schedule. In parallel with missile defense, the Russians have been building up their nuclear stockpile, which now far exceeds that held by us in the West. Obama attempted to preempt this move with a very threatening executive order dealing with Russia's highly enriched uranium required to make 3-stage nuclear devices, in layman's speak, megaton city destroyers. Whatever he tried to do behind the scenes has largely failed, and Russia has been acting in a more secretive way on alerting the West of the locations of its stockpiles. Alongside its now larger nuclear stockpile, Russia has successfully tested ABM-proof submarine-launched missiles. But even with these advantages, and its Kaliningrad site outfitted with an ABM-proof SS-26 Stone 9K720 Iskander hypersonic missiles, the U.S. still holds the first strike advantage over Russia. In terms of the outcome of such an exchange, the two states are held at parity, thanks mainly to Russia's perimeter, aka dead hand, automatic retaliation system. Some of those who have followed what I've said so far checked the sources and concluded that I've provided accurate information. You must be asking, why haven't I heard all of this before? Well, you can imagine how people's priorities would change should they become aware that they're facing a small but steadily increasing risk of annihilation. This is where we all move on to the contingencies in play for all scenarios, economic collapse or the aftermath of a nuclear war. Part 9. Threat Matrix. When the survival of the majority is threatened by an internal or external cause, the elite will act in a manner that protects them primarily and secondarily protects the majority until that majority begins to threaten the elite. Traditionally, at that point in time, the security apparatus is activated against the people and a civil war breaks out. Without outside support, the theory goes, the security apparatus will win. Should the confrontation continue between the states, and at the current rate things are going, that looks to be the case, eventually one or more of them will enter a state of effective bankruptcy. With the missile defense system coming up in 2019 or 2020, the decision makers in power will have at least the illusion of an unpunishable strike. But should the state accept its fate of bankruptcy, as the Soviet Union did in the 80s, it will ultimately face the Civil War consequences. Ideally, a state should hold on to both options as credible in order to be able to hold the nuclear option as a credible threat against the other states, as well as a means to avoid a preemptive war when one of them is cornered and the likelihood of a confrontation goes to 100%. This dynamic is a problem in the U.S. due to the First and Second Amendments. The public is very well armed, and there are enough people who know how to use a weapon such that, in the case of a confrontation, they will be able to not only defend themselves, but confront those actively putting them and their family in harm's way. Thanks to the First Amendment, people can, in theory, be as informed as they want to be about current international and local events and the risks and opportunities they entail. People can be prepared and prepare together without legally facing persecution. Currently, people are uninformed, but the situation can revert to that in the 80s, where the anti-war movement was large and vocal. It is thus important to keep people uninformed about the risks at play, with Obama casually saying he won't strike Russia, and no one calling him out hinting that he can. At the same time, it's important to demonize the other states in order to set the narrative for the population and keep the threat at hand credible. After all, the U.S. military is composed of the U.S. people, and if the elite are seen driving the U.S. people to certain death over nothing but their own survival, the military will refuse or force them out of power. If, however, the accepted narrative is that of an external state threatening the existence of the U.S. and behaving in an aggressive, irrational manner, the military is compelled to go along with the population's will or be seen as traitors.
Well, we're still not done. We've only covered the facts so far. In the next video, I'll cover the predictions and true in-game analysis of where this insider thinks this is all going to go on the geopolitical arena. Stay tuned.